Mic check, check, check. What's happening, y'all? Welcome back to another one. Hope y'all are doing well. Checking my levels here. Shout out to Mr. Don. Let's get to it. So we're here today for a special presentation. I'm going to call it WAR. But y'all are going to call it business. The BRICS versus the World Economic Forum. Exposed. Let's get to it. Hope y'all are doing well. I'm doing great. Like the God says, let there be light. And there was light. So, the BRICS. See, I knew there was a war. I didn't understand the war. I thought it was against the people. But no, it's against the principalities. So I'm going to break it down real quick. My synopsis before this even begins. The old guard is the World Economic Forum. These are the colonizers. These are the men that went up in people's yard and said, yo, forget natural resources. Forget living by the land. Broski, you're going to do what I tell you to do. Because I have nobility. And by the power invested in me by the Pope, I come to take your shit. World Economic Forum. All right. Old guards. Okay. Go back to their granddaddies. BRICS. These are the men that were subjugated to the granddaddies. All right. Now the BRICS are forming their alliances. And there's war. So let's find out what war is going on behind the scenes. Join me. This is, hold on, I forgot to introduce the whole program. Welcome to another Financial New. I'm your host. We're going to be talking about some interesting perspectives based on what's being presented to us by different presentators. Today, in regards to the situation, we're talking about the war between BRICS and the World Economic Forum. Join me. Join me. BRICS! Oh! I know the song I should have brought in here this way. Oh, I messed it up. I know the song I should have brought. I'm going to get it while you guys listen.
Hello everyone,
BRICS.
and welcome to BRICS Briefs. As we anticipated today, we are here with Matthew Ehret to elaborate and try to better clarify the relationship between the BRICS and the WEF, which concluded its last summit a few days ago. For those who don't know him, Matthew Ehret is a Canadian journalist, historian, and geopolitical analyst, editor of the Canadian Patriot Review, and co-founder of Rising Tide Foundation. He is known as a critic of Western oligarchies and promoter of Eurasian alliances such as that between Russia and China. Known for books such as The Clash of the Two Americas, he argues that British and US elites manipulate global systems through finance and culture. A frequent guest on RT and Sputnik, Ehret mixes history, anti-globalism, and the defense of sovereignty. Hi, Matthew.
Hello, Clive. And hi, Anastasia.
Hi, Matthew. Hello, Matthew.
Hi.
There we go.
Nice to see you with us.
Yeah, nice to be here.
Excellent. Really good to have you here. So today's talk is going to be pretty complex and full of nuances. So we'll do our best to stick to the main idea, but there'll probably be loads of extra stuff that needs to be discussed further. We decided to talk about BRICS and WF because we've been criticized for our videos. So that's what
building your online business
us a little bit. Some people have said that the BRICS are like globalism's gatekeepers, or the other side of a world government, which is what the WF is pushing for. But to us, this doesn't seem to fit with the BRICS idea of a multipolar world. While we're looking into this, we found your research, BRICS Plus versus WF, the clash of two green paradigms, which you based our video report on. So viewers can find it on our channel or in the link in the description below. But as I said, there are still a few things that aren't clear to us yet, and I'm sure a lot of you would like some reassurance on this subject too. So What's the real deal here? Are BRICS nations just playing along with the WEF? Given that many leaders from BRICS nations have attended the World Economic Forum, WEF, in the past, or are they genuinely trying to build something different, especially when it comes to stuff like Agenda 2030, and who actually benefits from all this?
That's a very good starting point. I think that I understand why many people have become somewhat cynical and jaded when they look at some of the common patterns as far as associations with internationalist organizations, globalist organizations such as the World Economic Forum, that we see in both a presence of the Chinese, of the Indians, of every country pretty much, Russia, as well as Western officials. We see language which often sounds similar, a sort of a paying of adherence to sustainable development goals, which I'm sure we'll talk about today. Other language like global cooperation comes up a lot in the diplomatic language. So there's patterns that come up, which cause many people to leap to the conclusion that any evidence of a fight between multipolarity or unipolarity is an illusion, a charade, and everything is in fact controlled opposition. And sincerely, that I understand where that's coming from, but this is why I wrote the article as well, was because when you look at the actual policies that have been enacted, both from the standpoint of energy, water, hydro, nuclear, advanced science, space, if you look at any of the actual policies that are animating the thinking from the standpoint of economics or the standpoint of war avoidance, diplomacy, coming out of the multipolar representative nations, I'm referring here to Russia, China, India, and the broader BRICS and growing BRICS array of allies, compared to the sort of thing that's been animating policy-wise those same things, shaping the transatlantic basket case society. There's a different universe. So the similar words will mean different things based upon concepts of whether we think that we're living in a world where depopulation must be a priority to protect nature from human life, which is what has been animating the Western calculus. As far as how we use words like sustainability, there's been an actual intention for population reduction, global enslavement behind the words, versus those same words that are animating an idea of increasing abundance, creating more space for more people to live at a higher quality of life based upon new discoveries and the application of new technologies. So these are all things which I find are important for me when I look at what Russia, China, and increasingly their allies are doing. And I'd say the other thing that I use as a standard when I go into an analysis of anything is the conception of open versus closed systems. So I've come to the conclusion in my research over the years that the oligarchy is religiously animated by an intention to impose closed systems of absolute master-slave relations and diminishing resources onto their slaves that are expected to adapt into those very fixed, rigid structures of control. That's part of what has been since the ancient Babylonian days of the high priesthood, has been keep the slaves fighting each other. So that's one of the things. Keep your victims in a state of forever conflict. Keep them stupid. So divide to conquer, keep people dumb, keep the culture as degenerate and depraved so that people cannot be their true selves, which would allow them to be creative, make discoveries. So you can't allow that. And then keep rigid systems of control in place. Whereas I don't see those same principles operational when I look at the policies that have pulled so many out of poverty through China's efforts that have pulled 1 billion out of poverty, and the general push towards war avoidance, instead of divide to conquer, improving technology as well as education. All of these things matter so much to me when I evaluate that, as well as evidence of a battle that is clearly measurable of very powerful elites that have been loyal to the West, that have controlled the fifth columns of Russia, China, especially over decades that have been built up, which I have seen evidence that I've measured. You can look at this and evaluate this, that many of these Western controlled elites have gone to jail, have been taken down. There's many points of evidence of battle lines between authentic patriotic institutions in opposition to these fifth columnists, these deep state operatives that are prevalent in all countries of the world. So that those are all things that I use when I'm trying to come up with my assessment of is the multipolar alliance fake or is it a legitimate fight? And I think it is legitimate.
Yeah, that's a really good principle to go from, open versus closed world systems, which I don't think enough people are aware of. But I did read your article about that. That was excellent as well. Going over that, because it's there's these principles which you go over with the two different green paradigms sort of thing, and in that context I think is excellent. So the language too.
Well,
Go ahead,
me
Anastasia.
myself, I read this article twice because from the first when I read it first time, I told myself, okay, let's think thoroughly and read it once again, because you did a really huge job, Matt, about that, comparing that to systems, we may say. But in your article, you have highlighted a stark contrast in how the WEF and BRICS approach sustainability, with the WEF focusing on reduced consumption and renewables, and BRICS prioritizing development and nuclear power. Could you elaborate on how these differing approaches impact the practical implementation of so-called sustainable development and what this means for their future of global energy?
Yes, no, I absolutely. That was sort of the beginning thrust of my article, and as well as several books I've written. Is this question of what does the word green or sustainable mean? Because the words by themselves are relatively innocuous. Who doesn't want a green world? Who wants to have pollution everywhere? Nobody. So the question is, how do you define the problem and how do you define its solutions? And when you look at the Chinese approach is a great example of people who say a lot about sustainability and green, but when they talk about it, they're looking at greening deserts. The biggest water diversion projects in history are being done currently by China, which has taken the water runoff from the flood regions of the south, where there's periodic flooding for thousands of years, and diverting that into the north, where there's a lot of arid, dry. The Gobi Desert is a major dry area, and they lack water. So you have now an idea of greening deserts. The idea also of, for example, when I look at China's solar panel policy, they have a lot of solar panels. Yes, they do. But they don't have the same problems we do in the West, which is that they reserve the energy used by the solar that accumulated and created by the photovoltaic cells for simply residential use, which is fine. You can have solar panel energy for residential uses. You cannot have that sustain heavy industry or transportation networks, high-speed rail networks, which require a lot of energy. It's impossible. It's absurd. You cannot do it. Whereas in the West, we are being told we have to, which is why our industries are being consciously destroyed in Germany and other places. They cannot justify paying their energy prices or even receiving the energy yields of very low quality, unreliable energy sources like wind and solar, when you need to have industrial melted steel processing of a lot of minerals. Like that requires so much energy that has to be reliable, has to be cheap, and constant. You can't wait for the wind to blow or the sun to shine and hope that you won't have clouds. So China doesn't have those types of intellectual problems. Everything has its place within a broader system. But when it comes to the type of industrial growth that China has robustly created and is committed to continually growing over the coming decades, and its allies, for that, we have their idea of green is let's invest there in massive clean coal. Let's invest in natural gas and oil, which they're doing. They're breaking records as far as coal production, and especially nuclear power, as you alluded to. So their idea is, if people all seem to be brainwashed to try to undo carbon dioxide from the greenhouse gases, I mean, they're not even getting into the fight over whether or not that's even a problem. Because in my view, and I think scientifically speaking, it's actually not an issue. It's plant food. Plants like carbon dioxide. But rather than get into that, because it's become a bit of a religious cult of the West.
I love how he put. Yo, I love this guy. I love this guy. He's so right. He's so right. Let's rewind that for 2 seconds.
Scientifically speaking, it's actually not an issue. It's plant food.
Let's say that slowly. All right, everybody. Let's take a breath. You're feeding the plants. Do you understand that? Carbon dioxide. Did you remember grade whatever freaking biology, whatever it is? Plants sequester the carbon dioxide and they produce oxygen. It is their job to remove the toxin called carbon dioxide from our environment and give us oxygen. So this is why we should be growing stuff like hemp for our paper industry and leave the trees alone. Like the real trees. Let's not forget, the trees of this earth was cut down. The big trees were cut down. All right, I'm going to leave it there. My man. I love this guy. The trees are there to remove carbon dioxide.
Because
our carbon dioxide is plant food.
View, and I think scientifically speaking, it's actually not an issue. It's plant food. Plants like carbon dioxide. But rather than get into that, because it's become a bit of a religious cult of the West, this idea that we have to fight CO2 to stop global warming, it's a religion now. It's more than something logical. But instead of debating all of the details, their approach is, well, okay, if you want to get rid of CO2, let's build nuclear power. Let's invest in 3rd and 4th generation nuclear reactors, pebble bed reactors, which they have done. They're the only nation that has operational 4th generation pebble bed gas cooled reactors that can produce more fuel than they started off with. They're the only nation to have an operational thorium reactor, utilizing thorium, which we should all have. It's much more abundant. Yeah, meltdown proof. They're doing it, showing us that every nation should do that. And I would say, Russia and China together represent something like, with India, 76% or so of the world nuclear builds that are happening. In the West, we were told that we're not allowed to have that because it gives us too much abundant, reliable, powerful, quality, cheap energy, which is what people like Maurice Strong and the higher oligarchs that created the World Economic Forum have been trying to withhold, because they don't want to give their victims the opportunity to create a real abundance, which would justify not having depopulation. So
they're victims?
These are very...
Sorry. Sir, what do you mean they're victims? Hold on. Do you know the truth? Have you been doing your research? Oh my God.
Really important things to me when they use words like green, or they use words like sustainability. It's a different thing. And the last thing I'll say on this point, which I began the essay with in reference that you've made, is that when we came in 2009 very close to accepting a green world government under the COP14 climate agreements that were being enforced by Obama at the time, Sarkozy, Merkel, and others. We're all celebrating the idea that finally we would get legally binding climate quotas to shut down world carbon dioxide and be enforced by world governing mechanisms that every nation would finally agree upon. And it was coming at a time of an economic crisis, as well as systemic breakdown that could have possibly have been the thing that would have shut down the world economy in 2008 and 9. There was, a variety of there was a pandemic that was created as well, the H1N1 thing that was also designed to see how people would react psychologically. And fortunately, that all of those promised agreements for world governing green mechanisms were sabotaged by specifically the delegations of China and India, as well as some African nations who locked themselves in a room and didn't come out. And they were told by the Chinese government, do not participate in these proceedings. And they didn't. And it became a giant embarrassment for those like Obama and others who promoted the idea that this was going to be the biggest thing in the world. And it was a failure. So they largely bought the world a lot of time by that sabotage. And there's many other examples of a resistance by these nations which wish development, which have not permitted. They'll often allow a treaty to be signed that has no legally binding effects. So at various COP 21, COP 24, COP 27, there's going to be some text that everybody will agree as words they will write, but it's words. The creation of legally enforcing mechanisms has always been sabotaged by China, often by Russia, usually also India participating and saying, no, we'll put the words on paper, but we're not going to actually allow for the creation of anything that can do it, that can enforce that. So it's, again, it confuses certain people from the West trying to make sense of things. But these go a long way in my mind to decide, is this the same sustainability, or is this a different idea of sustainability?
If those countries, you say, they sign those agreements and so on, but actually, in fact, they do not follow those agreements, why do they not refuse to sign only?
Well, I get the sense that there's a fight over influence, and I think part of this is that throughout all of human history, there's been generally political structures, power structures, animated by ideology and cults. For example, in ancient times, you couldn't necessarily just go as a representative of one society, let's say in Greece, and go and talk to the Persians, and just go, if you're trying to actually create some sort of let's say your intention is to try to create an avoidance of war with Persia. Let's say that there were efforts to do that at times. They weren't always at war with each other. You're not just going to be able to go and insult their particular deities. You're not going to be able to just do that. If you do that, you will enrage the Persians, the leadership, and the people, who will be very offended that you've just insulted whatever array of deities in their pantheon they take very seriously, and they will, any chance of having a positive outcome will be sabotaged, and vice versa. The Persians are not going to go and insult Zeus or something like that. They won't tend to do that, or if they do, it's because they're now prepared to go into war footing. So I think that the Gaia cult has been something specifically created in our secular age, where people think, oh, we don't have ancient pagan deities and mystery cults running our world anymore. We're in the secular scientific Enlightenment age of reason. And it's like, well, that's naive. No, we actually, from the standpoint of the architects of the power structures and ideologies of the world in which we are presently living, we do it, in fact, have these things. And I would say the creation in the West, especially during the early days of the Cold War, of a revived Gaia cult, but with a secular veneer, has been an intention by those like Prince Bernhard, Prince Philip, who represent a higher faction of controllers within the Great Game, so-called, who were the founders of the Bilderberger Group, and not just the Bilderberger Group, which was sort of a globalist coordinating organization set up in
The Council for Foreign Relations. I think he's missing that one. The Council for Foreign Relations.
1954. But Prince Bernhard was also the creator, with Prince Philip and Sir Julian Huxley, of the World Wildlife Fund for Nature in 1961. Sir Julian Huxley, a leading eugenicist who was the president of the Eugenic Society of Great Britain for many years, was also the founder of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature in 1947. And if you read their manifestos, the Morg's Manifesto, that set up the essence, the spirit, and purpose of the World Wildlife Fund, as well as the other associated organizations that came out of that over the ensuing years, their idea was to fundamentally alter the value system of society, especially focusing on the new baby boomer generation that was being born after World War II. And their idea was to reset civilization's values by changing our idea of what is good and what is wrong when it comes to human nature and politics, by reframing what was formerly the ethic, which was save humanity from empires, right? Do that by increasing technology, increasing progress, helping people leap outside of the limits to growth, as John F. Kennedy, Charles de Gaulle, and many other very good leaders believed in and were animated by, and instead redefine that around saving nature from humans. And part of that, I think, came out with an idea of reviving the ethics of the old Gaia-worshipping Earth Mother goddesses of the ancient times, where there was this idea that human beings are unnatural. When we build roads or we build infrastructure, it's always going to be destructive to nature. And because of that false, I guess you could call it a sophistry, they create a false association that human beings are unnatural. Human beings are thus destructive. By our nature, we are pollution. We are thus bad. And anything which reduces our activity on the earth, and this was the case for the ancient Earth Mother cults of the past, everything which reduces our impact on nature becomes good. So anything which results in ultimately killing people is typically an unfortunate good thing. And this was what Thomas Malthus was prescribing when he was calling for the elimination of babies that would be to solve overpopulation, when he was calling for the spread of wars and disease and famine in order to do God's work to solve overpopulation. He was the leading priest of the British East India Company, and working, he promoted those theories as if they were scientific, and they never were, because he didn't allow for anyone to acknowledge the fact of human creative inspiration, the soul, the ability to discover God's creation. These things were not part of his realm of possibilities. And because of the inability to make discoveries, we would always be locked in a closed system of diminishing returns, which is where Ricardo, John Stuart Mill, Adam Smith, they were all promoters of this same ideology that would say that, okay, since we are pollution, we will always grow like a cancer to the point that we will have a crisis of our carrying capacity. We must act preventatively in the present as enlightened leaders to reduce those future crises of overpopulation now by encouraging famine and war. That's what the Prince Bernhard, Prince Philip, they were self-identified Malthusians trying to revive this very disgusting ideology, which was, again, very, very much baked upon a religious consideration. So I think that it's so out of control, and there's several generations of brainwashing that is baked into the political class, who are not intrinsically bad people, but they have been brainwashed by a cult ideology, and it is beyond logic. It goes beyond that. So I think
absolutely beyond logic. Sorry for interrupting you. No. Last year, COP28, if I'm not mistaken, was held in Dubai, and green energy head of that commission was one of the princes of Dubai, the country who is pumping nonstop every day.
Yes. No, it's a bit of a joke.
It was ridiculous when you see the same person appearing in 2 hours difference in one committee talking about green energy, and after 2 hours he goes to another show and telling people that that oil is very useful for the nation, I don't know, it's okay, but you are the head of the Green Committee.
Yes, I think it was. I laughed as well when I saw that, and like the UAE currently, they've joined the BRICS. They've embraced a different type of paradigm from the one that was expected of them for the past decades, which was, along with other oil-rich countries, they were expected to be resource extracting nations only that would be used as proxies, dependent upon Western political and financial powerhouses for their military defense, for their finished goods that they would have to import from typically Western dominated power structures. And they've since begun to reject that by saying no, they wish to have full spectrum economies for the first time that allows for manufacturing, factories, and they find themselves having to play ball with people who are religiously committed to these Green New Deal programs, and they're having to use language, make certain accommodations, but at the same time they're massively increasing oil, natural gas. And again, it's I think of it in that standpoint, that they're dealing with the believers of certain deities that maybe don't have names like Zeus or Jupiter or whatever, but they are still deities nonetheless of anthropogenic climate change models and stopping global warming and these things. Like, so that's all it is. I see it as diplomacy in that sense, but in terms of the reality, they're massively embracing oil, natural gas, and other things that are supposedly really bad and off limits.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting, Matt, what you've just gone over. For example, we do hear that narrative a lot in the popular, in the alternative media, and also in the mainstream, of like China's building lots of power plants and the West is not allowed to. But as you just said, they're building clean coal power plants where before they didn't have. They had dirty coal power plants. And also in China and underdeveloped countries, they had an issue with local pollution. So it's a real issue.
Yeah.
This is very interesting. I mean, this sort of detail where you're pulling this apart and differentiating is really valuable, I think. But I've got a prepared, we've got some prepared questions. So, but you've covered a little bit of this, so let me read it, and then I'll, and you strike what you want to. So, you've detailed the differences in energy policies between the West, which has stagnated in nuclear development, which is a big issue, and BRICS nations that are investing heavily in nuclear energy. So, could you please explain the historical context behind the West shift away from nuclear power and how it is linked to the philosophy of limits to growth? So you did touch on this a little bit. How does this contrast with the BRICS approach to economic development and energy independence?
Yep. Well, the growth of nuclear power was an unexpectedly spectacular revolution in energy at the outcome of World War II, and it was something which, especially for the civilian application of nuclear energy, was something which created an immense amount of growth power, growth capability for our agro-industrial civilization. We saw that by, I think now, for example, in Canada, as well as in the US, it's approximately 20% or a little less than 20% of the overall energy basket comes from nuclear. I'm not too sure about the proportions for Europe necessarily, but in the case of Canada and the United States, we've built hardly anything in over 40 years. So there was a decision made back in the 1970s with the Trilateral Commission takeover of the United States, of the revival of the neo-Malthusian high priests that took control of the levers of power. It wasn't just foreign policy and domestic policy alone that was affected on an economic front. The energy policy was a high priority to create a moratorium on the development of nuclear power, especially next generation nuclear power, the closing of the nuclear fuel cycle, which we were very close to in the 1970s, which would have involved reprocessing nuclear spent fuel instead of simply burying it. So the technology has been available, but the means to actually fulfill that technology, to make it practicable on a commercial level, was sabotaged by these Trilateral Commission ideologues who wished to instead rule the world based on a logic of geopolitics, a science of scarcity, and the keeping of society locked in forever to an addiction to simply coal and oil, because those things were generally monopolized by things like the Seven Sisters, the major oil cartels, Royal Dutch Shell, Chevron, many of those companies having a major influence, or being influenced by, I should say, the Bilderberger Group. So to the degree that they could do that, which was affected by people like George Shultz, Henry Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who were all Trilateral Commission members in the 70s under Gerald Ford, Carter, and onward, you could then control the levers of war. You could initiate increasingly oil wars between neighbors. You could do things that would involve keeping people in a state of very reduced capability mentally as well as physically, what you could do. Whereas if you had a full-blown nuclear policy, as Zulfikar, the prime minister of Pakistan, was trying to do to create a nuclear renaissance of Pakistan in the 70s. The Egyptian leadership was also trying to move towards nuclear power. Gamal Abdel Nasser, many leaders of the world were all trying to move towards nuclear, as was John F. Kennedy, who made that a very high priority. Charles de Gaulle, that played a big role in France's heavy nuclear industry and its growth, was because it was understood that you could break out of the logic of scarcity and forever wars for limited resources if you have the power of the atom at your disposal. And so you could read the writings of Maurice Strong, who oversaw the nuclear moratorium when he was managing Petro-Canada in the 1970s and 80s. He was the head of Ontario Hydro, which was where most of Canada's nuclear power is located. He found himself an anti-nuclear ideologue, the founder of the modern Green New Deal, a co-founder of Davos. That Maurice Strong was in charge of Canada's nuclear policy for several years, where he sabotaged and tried to shut it all down. The same thing was happening with his counterparts in the US, like James Schlesinger, the energy secretary, who forced a complete nuclear moratorium in the US after 1980 or 81. So the idea was to always create an excuse to have society self-implode. And that's a big deal. Whereas, again, you look at, I alluded to this, China, Russia, India, they are carrying the vast majority of the new nuclear builds that have been done in the last 30 years, but also that are being built currently under construction and that are planned for the ensuing decades. So this indicates, again, an unwillingness to adapt to scarcity, but to rather increase abundance in a way which I would say, additionally, it demands higher education, higher cognitive powers, because to have a society with heavy nuclear power, not only does it get you closer to fusion, because currently we're still using fission, but that science of fission will get you closer to appreciating the subtle but still undiscovered geometries of the atom, which by discovering we can tap into and use, which involves understanding plasmas, the nature of how plasma, which is the fourth state of matter, relates to creating fusion processes which see atoms like helium-3 or deuterium merging together to become new, heavier elements on the Mendeleev table, while releasing an immense amount of energy. Some of that matter becomes energy that can be applied to do work. Now, the level of knowledge that is needed for a society that is utilizing those technologies is of a extremely high magnitude. High intellectual powers must be available in your education system, in your culture in general, which you don't need to have if you're a society which is addicted to solar panels, which requires literally, for maintenance once they're built, the mindset of people who have the knowledge of a squeegee, who just go out into the desert to squeegee the photovoltaic cells, which requires no knowledge. So that's one of, I think, the important elements for the oligarchy, is they want to keep our cognitive levels as low as possible, because we'll be more easy to control as a slave society if we're not able to use the power of our minds, which makes it more difficult in an advanced industrial society, which is growing. People are less inclined to think of themselves as slaves.
That's a really important point, actually. Yeah. I totally agree with you, Matt. And also the engineering required. And like you talk about isotopes, different isotopes, and obviously if you have different isotopes available, then you can do research and development, you can break new barriers. So, but that's a very important point.
But research and development takes money and a lot of time.
I love his point of view on the fact that the old oligarchs have worked so hard to put themselves in position where they can take control over the quote-unquote average individual. I love how he's pointing out that they are intentionally shutting down industries that would have benefited the human experience a lot better. I'm just flabbergasted that he can say this and not like be blocked or censored. Go, Matt, go! Let's keep on going.
Did you know, Matt, that the fuel for the nuclear plant that operating in the United States, they get from Russia, enriched uranium.
That's a lovely irony.
Yeah, because the United States, they have a very low capacity of enriching uranium. So thanks to the Russian Federation, still American nuclear plants are working and
Go Russia.
producing, if I'm not mistaken, over 60% of all energy.
I'm writing that down. I'm going to use that fact. Thank you. I didn't realize it was that much. And
You may
love
watch our video. We have done a video dedicated to the uranium on our channel. So
That was
Oh, that
very
is-
popular.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was very popular.
You talk about Bitcoin, but we're not talking about raw materials. There's all this talk about Bitcoin, but what about raw materials like uranium? Where's the uranium coin? Where's the uranium tokenization? I want some uranium stock.
Yes,
All right,
All
I
right.
like that. That sounds
Yeah,
good.
because
No,
recently, Russia told that it would like to limit, not absolutely stop, but limit selling uranium to the United States.
well, that's
Enriched uranium, because the only country that have capacities, industrial capacities for enriching uranium is Russia.
Which goes to your point again, Matt.
Yeah.
Where you're saying, the country that has the most advanced and is providing the nuclear systems is being attacked and, right now and suppressed. And so it goes against your point. So.
And again, in Europe, the biggest nuclear country is France. Because they didn't stop their program. When in Germany they shouted, "Oh, it's so dangerous to have a nuclear plant in a neighborhood," France told, "Okay, I will supply energy to you." And France is the biggest supplier of the electrical energy in Europe.
I know. No, it's such a brilliant irony, and Germany had so much going for it. In I think 1999, they still had 30% of their overall energy basket was nuclear, and it just continued to go down and down until Fukushima all of a sudden created this mass frenzy of fear mongering, and they accelerated the total shutdown. So now the people, like you said, they don't realize that they're still using energy. It's just that that energy is now imported from either, ironically, France, which is still nuclear, or from like the Czech Republic, which is producing a lot of dirty coal, which the Germans are think is the most evil thing in the world, and they're so pure for shutting down coal production as well. Or Ukraine, my God, yeah. So no, people just
Or like in America. Hold on. An irony that he points out was very critical is that they will sell you a green energy, but then produce it dirty. And I use the example of Tesla Motor Company because many a times you'll find the Tesla charger stations being powered by a diesel generator. Laugh my ass off.
They've been made so illiterate about the elementary basics of energy science, which we should learn in grade 2. You know, when kids are 7, 8 years old, I see no reason to believe that it's impossible to teach them these elementary basic facts of life, of what it requires to sustain 8 billion lives. You know, it's not magic. It requires food production. It requires certain amounts of steel. Those things can only be done if you have energy that's reliable. If you don't, you can't have the food. You can't make the things that are needed to sustain the 8 billion lives. People will suffer unless you can change. So these are there. I think there's been a conscious undermining of our school system to make people incompetent intellectually on these very basic things that they need to know if they're going to go into, you know, economics or become a political figure or a diplomat. They should know this. They don't know this.
Well, you mentioned 7-year-old children. I had a conversation with one of editor-in-chief of one of the biggest newspapers in Egypt. And lately there was an agreement between Russia and Egypt to build a nuclear plant there.
Yeah.
And that gentleman told me that he is absolutely against that idea.
Okay.
Editor-in-chief of one of the biggest Egyptian newspapers, because nuclear energy is not eco-friendly and dangerous, because he still recalls what newspapers wrote after Chernobyl disaster.
Oh,
yeah.
It's.
I told you, are you insane? Your country is growing. You are, I don't know how many people, millions of people living in, and you think that you don't need nuclear energy? And he said, we should find another sources of energy. I asked him, for example, why didn't you find that until today?
Yeah.
But not nuclear energy. That was the response. This people is against, and it's dangerous and not eco-friendly.
Well, that's the new religion, right? It's more than, it's beyond, like you said, it's beyond logic. And I would be curious to see where he got his education. Did he get his training in a nice little, you know, Western university, or was it, you know, was it Western money that retooled many of the curriculums of these abused nations, you know, as part of IMF conditionality? Probably the second one, yeah. And people have been so traumatized. There's so much, and I had it too. You know, I also, coming out of the society, had a very negative view. I was of nuclear power for much of my life. It's relatively only in the last, you know, 10 or so years that I began to realize that I was lied to. But the trauma is big, you know, and people not only have Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island meltdown hysterics in their mind and the propaganda there, but, you know, The Simpsons did a number on many people of our generation and younger, which is that, you know, we associate nuclear with billionaire Montgomery Burns and Homer Simpson at the safety helm and Three-Eyed Fish, and like that's what.
Good point.
Yeah, it has an effect on our psyche as a culturally speaking. But when you look at things like Chernobyl, I mean, whether or not that was sabotage, and I've seen some arguments that have shown that might have been sabotage, or at the very least incompetence that could have easily have been avoided because they were using obsolete technologies from the 1950s that were very foreseeably dangerous. They skipped certain safety protocols. And, you know, when you're sloppy with a lot of power, you create very big danger. So the moral lesson isn't, including with Fukushima too, right? Like the reactors that failed after the tsunami hit, and it was a tsunami that killed these thousands of 20,000 people or 30,000 people. It was the tsunami, but most people in the West led to think that they died because of a nuclear meltdown. That's what they think. But it's like those 6 reactors that melted, that actually had the problems, were obsolete. They were outdated technologies, and the reactors that withstood the tsunami's effect, there were many reactors that were perfectly okay. They were the ones that were upgraded with modern tech that were not from the early 60s. And so the moral lesson should be, using power comes with responsibility. Don't skip steps. don't do it just for profit, do it for the right reasons and do it well. Don't cancel the technology and say that because fire caused my village a house fire, I should ban fire. Just stop the arsonists who are going around lighting fires. That's the lesson. Don't ban fire. And that's what the oligarchy has gotten us to do. They've gotten us to think that fire is the enemy. Right? Yeah, it's a sick joke.
Okay, let's come back to your article, Matt, because there is another point that caught my attention too. That you pointed out that the BRICS nations are actively working within existing global institutions like the United Nations, IMF, World Bank, etc., rather than abandoning them. How does this approach demonstrate a different strategy from the WEF's push for a unified decision-making structure? And
I want to answer that for him before he does. They understand the logic of you got to take the hand out of the lion's mouth slowly, sweetheart. The young lady asked the question, why does BRIC still participate in certain forums with the knowledge that these are the enemy, period? And my response is that you have to pull your hand out of the lion's mouth slowly.
What are the potential long-term implications of this strategy for the global balance of power?
Great question. Yeah, it's an influence game. It's a fight over who can influence, and I think that China and the broader BRICS leadership around Lavrov and friends, they're working very hard to influence these agencies towards effects which will be beneficial to sovereign nation states. And part of that, I think, comes from an appreciation of the purpose of the UN to begin with. Because originally, when the United Nations was created in 1945, it was created as a basis for dialogue, but also the defense of sovereign nation states, which if people read the charter of the UN, Article 1 and Article 2, clearly enshrine the institution of the sovereign nation state as sacred. It's the essential, unnegotiable quality of the UN is a respect for sovereign nation states as the basis of all decision making. Also, within the early articles of the charter is an abandonment of militarism, of invading by force, like one country into another. That's absolutely verboten, and I think any society fit morally to survive must abide by, especially that principle, which has been at the heart of all of the wars in all of civilization's history, is getting neighbors to fight each other, right? And so these things have Trojan horses. After Franklin Roosevelt died, and Roosevelt had a certain idea for a Russia, China, U.S. Industrial alliance that would force Britain to be dragged along into an anti-imperial new type of architecture after World War II, based upon mutual cooperation around large-scale projects, the internationalization of the New Deal, which involved building thousands of major infrastructure projects in the United States, the rural electrification program that transformed the Tennessee Valley area of the backwater south of the United States within 15 years into an industrial hub of aerospace that erased illiteracy, which was 85% in 1931, and created a situation of 93% illiteracy by 1950. That was something studied by Pan-African leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, leaders of nations that had been abused by centuries of imperialism, studied in America to see how they did it. How did Franklin Roosevelt carry out a battle with the Wall Street banks, with the City of London bankers, who all at different times had tried to get a one world government in 1933, again in 1939. And Franklin Roosevelt had carried out with allies, he wasn't doing this by himself, a very important battle on several fronts, which allowed for the sabotage of the Nazi fascist solution to the Great Depression as the world the New World Order was intended by certain industrialists and financiers of London and especially of Wall Street back in those days, who tried to kill Roosevelt. So he carried out a successful battle. He was probably murdered by poisoning, as Stalin had professed to Roosevelt's son later on. But part of the idea was to create a US, Russia, China alliance that would then drive a new system of global cooperation. And the UN was going to be a platform to facilitate that dialogue. It was never supposed to be an enforcement mechanism from a unipolar agenda onto the nations of the world. And associated institutions that were created at Bretton Woods, like the IMF, the World Bank, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, that later on was sabotaged and was transformed into a perversion of itself after 1971. And the creation of the World Trade Organization. That was sort of a perverse mutation of those 1944 institutions. But originally, the reason why they were created was not to create a new colonialism. It was originally, and Russia was originally had an agreement to be a partner state of the IMF with $1 billion investment originally, while Roosevelt was alive and this dream was still alive. And they were supposed to be instruments to extend credit for the industrial needs of the poor nations to begin to develop full spectrum economies. So that was the original spirit of these institutions. Now, the fact that Roosevelt did die too soon, his enemies took over the White House under Truman. They created a new Anglo-American special relationship. They sabotaged the relations that America had with Russia by design. They dropped nuclear bombs unnecessarily onto Japan as an assertion of power onto especially the Russians and the Chinese. And that was a sad tragedy. And in that context, there were Trojan horses introduced into the UN Charter that occurred, that was written in the 1945 September San Francisco Conference. And among those, the most vicious Trojan horses was Article 52 to 56, which allowed for the creation of blocks. This is what was used to justify the creation of the EU. It was used to justify the creation of NATO. So all of these regional blocks was baked in, and this is part of the Count Coudenhove-Kalergi program, because he had a big role to play with the CFR and British intelligence in doing that, which didn't negate the usefulness of the earlier articles that are still there. And for anybody who's a wise diplomat and knows their history, which I believe is much more prevalent in China and Russia than it is in the West, they will act upon the idea that, okay, we need to defend the UN because we need to defend the right of the sovereign nation state, as the UN Charter outlines it as its priority in its original articles. And so I think they're using a language which is based upon influencing these things towards good ends, maybe even the ends that they were originally intended and not how they were induced to behave. And I would say lastly, the reason why the oligarchy is successful is they don't say the evil that they want, that they intend publicly. They use nice words, which we can all agree on, like, the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. They don't say increase scarcity, increase hunger, increase war, and decrease population. They don't say that, though that's what they want euphemistically, but as an effect. But they say we need good health for everybody. We need quality education for everyone. We need to end poverty for everyone. We need to end.
I love how he has highlighted that the World Economic Forum is involved in doublespeak, meaning they will say, hey, we want to do good for everyone, but then they'll say, but these set of people are the problem, so if we remove these people, it will be better for everyone. It's called doublespeak. It's a way of manipulation. It's a way of inclandestinely telling people what you don't want to do. It's trickery, tomfoolery, blood clot. All right, let's go.
Hunger for everyone, and we need to build partnerships, and we need to have affordable, clean energy for everyone. And it's like, okay, well, a Chinese diplomat would say, okay, you want those things? Let's figure out how to do those things. Whereas the Klaus Schwabian types, they think differently. They're not happy with that. And I think also at the World Economic Forum, most people are not there because they want to do bad. I think that within the Economic Forum, the Davos conferences, most people go there because they want to do business deals. They want to. It's a place to hobnob, network, with high level people who can make decisions in politics that
For
are
profit.
Yeah, for profit. Then within that, there are subgroups, inner clubs, where there are a few who do know what the real game is, and they're vicious, and they know that everything else is an illusion. But I think when you have the presence of people going there, whether it's Trump or whether it's the Russians or the Chinese, oftentimes more often than not, they're just trying to make business deals because they know that it's going to be harder to create war if you have economic relations. And business is a type of diplomacy. If you have strong business contacts, it is a way of having influence to avoid wars, if that's your intention. And wars are bad for business. Maybe for the military-industrial complex, they're good for business, but they kill your customers. They're actually bad for business. So that's how I think about their relationship to these institutions.
No, that's great. We've got about 5 minutes left, Matt. So I don't want to cut short because that your detail and your explaining is really valuable. But we try to limit the time. So I'm going to skip the last question, and I'll just ask you. We do have a lot more that we'd love to ask you. We know our audience have plenty to say, but as an analyst, not someone in the know about secrets or the inner thoughts of global leaders in the West or the global South, we'd like to end with a look to the future. So, this year's WEF felt really quiet. It started on 20th of January, which coincided with everyone being distracted by Donald Trump's presidential inauguration. So Trump's remote address, where he reiterated his anti-globalist stance, became the event's defining moment. People noticed that there weren't many big names there and lots of empty seats in the audience. What do you think? Is this a sign that the WEF is becoming less relevant, or is it just a temporary thing?
Well, that remains to be seen. I think the currently, it was satisfying to see the failure of this year's conference. I think the increasing purpose over the last 20 years of the WEF has been generally to try to bring about a cancellation of nation states in preparation for a controlled demolition of our economy, which has been baked into the wiring of the Western banking system. There's a time bomb in the form of derivatives, the unpayable debts that have been baked into the securitized debt obligations and derivative contracts, which far outnumber and far outweigh the overall GDP of the world, and that will blow. That is the time bomb that will be detonated. So part of the World Economic Forum's mandate increasingly became from the top, not everybody, like I said, who participates, but from the top, increasingly an organization that was designed to prepare the ground for the new captured system that would be brought online after a period of calamity. And that system would have certain wirings around what I outlined at the beginning of being built around a closed system framework that would force scarcity to be increased as society would be contracted in a very, very bloody way. As it became more realized that Russia and China were not going to play ball with this, and especially I think a big peak of that was what I mentioned with the COP14 sabotage by Russia, China, India, and African nations in 2009, it became increasingly clear that they weren't going to play along and be a part of this global controlled demolition of the world banking system as was intended originally. And they began creating new parallel systems outside of the influence. The world, the Belt and Road Initiative, the other associated national banks of China and other institutions like the BRICS Development Bank and other things, they started creating new institutions that would help them survive and build up a viable real economy that would float while the rest of the world was tanking. And so if that couldn't be sabotaged, which they've been trying to sabotage that for the past 13, 14 years now, if that couldn't be sabotaged, then the whole game plan would break down. They couldn't just pull the plug on the Western system while this was still alive. So I think now they've come to the realization that they need to do something different. The Davos plan, as it was known, is no longer sort of on the front burner, and I think that there is an effort to try to undo the damage of the past 50 years of deindustrialization and consumer societyism, which has resulted in a lot of mediocrity and incompetence in the West culturally and economically. They're trying to now undo that and reverse it by going back to a pro-industrial policy to try to revive our lost industries that we've destroyed over 50 years of globalization. They're trying to, I don't know if it's possible, but I think that part of it, that unshackling of the chains that have been put onto creative progress, they have to unshackle it, only not because they want progress, but only because they want to beat Russia, China, and other nations. So part of that involves a bit of a risky thing. We saw this is what I call the Churchill reflex, the Churchill reflex in World War II, where Churchill had to unleash Britain's control over its colonies, Australia, Canada, which were not allowed to have heavy industry under the British Empire. But in order to stop Hitler at a certain point and to abort that program, they had to, unfortunately, allow a limited array of technological progress in their colonies to save them from the Frankenstein monster that they had created. And I think they have a similar situation today where they're unleashing that in the United States. And there's a space now for patriots who are authentic, including in Europe, to go into that space to fight to make sure that that pro-growth, pro-industrial policy is legitimate and in the defense of the nations of the real sovereign nation states and the people. But then also you have the transhumanist Silicon Valley billionaire club that are also trying to co-opt that and use that in a more contained manner in preparation for a war with Russia and China. So you've got different factions vying for influence, again, for good and for bad in all sides. And that's how I'm sort of thinking about the failure of Davos this year.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. That's a great rundown. Excellent.
Okay. Right.
Well, we're going to close off. Closing thoughts, Anastasia, and then Matt?
I do not have closing thoughts. Proceed,
No.
Clive.
Okay. Matt, is there something that you would like to, I would say definitely watch and look for the Rising Tide Foundation, Matthew Ehret's work on Substack, YouTube. Definitely watch the Open Closed World System lecture that you gave live at, where was that? Sorry.
That was probably in Basel, I guess? The one
Yes.
on stage? Yeah.
In Switzerland, yes.
Yeah.
So, he was up on stage and, have a watch. So, but your closing remarks, Matt.
Yeah, well, thank you. I guess my closing remarks is that I just hope that people take this crisis as an opportunity to do some self-examination and to look at what is it that made us good in the past that we let go of, because there's something beautiful about Western civilization that we haven't seen a lot of, but that people like John F. Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, de Gaulle understood as something worth fighting for and dying for, which the oligarchy hates and fears. So if we can tap back into those moral lessons of the greatness that we once were morally and intellectually and politically, we'll be able to better understand what is awakening in the cultural dynamics, I think, of the Confucian Renaissance active in the culture of China, the cultural dynamics of Russia, what we see being revived in India as a real dignified idea of anti-imperialism and a desire to survive coming into the current storm, and we'll be able to find certain common qualities that are universal within different cultures that are very different from our culture, but have certain common attributes that make them beautiful as well, and something that we can have dignified adult conversations with about the future. And I pray that the Patriot movement, which I see in some degree around Trump, and I include Trump himself within this movement, is capable of seeing this type of strategy for navigating through the fire, which involves harmonizing a friendship with Russia over the Arctic, with China on a variety of fronts, especially on energy and especially on space and nuclear. These are all things that we could find all sorts of wonderful points of cooperation on, that the oligarchy would not benefit thereby and would actually be contained and reduced in influence for the first time in many, many years, because this vicious oligarchy has been latched on like a parasite to human civilization for thousands of years. And we need to finally grow up and do something about this artificially very vicious, very sophisticated cultural movement of bloodlines that are sociopathic and evil. And we got to do something about that finally. So I'm hoping that can happen.
Yeah, agreed.
One little question, Matt, for you.
Yeah.
Would you like Canada to be the 51st state?
It all depends on what the U.S. is going to become, right?
After Trump told that he would like very patriotically annex Greenland.
Yeah, well, if it involves Greenland breaking free of all monarchical parliamentary systems and having, yeah, sure, why not? And if Canada can finally break with the monarchy and get rid of the Privy Council, I think it would be perfectly good. But the danger would be that that this is a trick to make America more Canadian, which might also be a bit of a trap that's being set, which I'm thinking about right now, and we can maybe have a future chat about that sometime down the line.
That's interesting. Okay, we'll leave the audience with that one.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, we'll close off. Thank you very much, Matt. We want to have you back on, so we'll do that again. That's it for BRICS Briefs. Please like and share and spread with your network. Thank you very much.
All white bricks, all white bricks, white 10 bricks, just hit a lick for 50 more bricks, ballin' like a with all these bricks, 36, that's a whole chick, want a bad, gotta have bricks, yeah that makes sense, yeah I make hits, but I still take, so I can see, yo, I'm a fool with the
Let's leave it there. BRICS. Y'all didn't even hear me talking your shit. BRICS. African BRICS. Russian BRICS. What you know about it? BRICS. China BRICS. African Brazil BRICS. All right, what y'all think? What y'all think of that? That was a beautiful presentation by Mr. Matthew and his co-hosts. I don't know what to say. I'm hyped. War. Now, just to make y'all know clear, I'm an American. Okay, I'm an American Carib. Okay, I was here. My ancestors were here before Christopher Columbus set foot on this friggin' landmass. You understand me? So I'm a little patriotic when it comes to these BRICS. Yeah, the whole oligarch thing, the whole energy sequestration, the technology. We could be running on water, hydrogen, a little electrolysis, 2 volts, run a little frequency up in that bad boy, and you can produce hydrogen, which has like 10 times more explosiveness than gasoline. So in other words, you use 1/10 of the fuel to produce the same amount of energy. You use 1/10 of the fuel to same amount of energy, and then the byproduct of that fuel is water. I'll say it again. After the fuel is burnt, it produces water because the molecules condense back into the original form, sequesters oxygen, returns back into a molecule, and you just get water vapor. BRICS. I'm gonna leave it there, guys. That was a beautiful presentation. So what do y'all think? Is it worthwhile us coming together under one accord? I don't think I need that tape. That's what it is. Y'all let me know. Interesting presentation. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for joining me on another Financial News. Like, subscribe, tell somebody that cares, tell someone that doesn't care. They're not going to care.
All white bricks, off white bricks, white tan bricks. Just hit a lick for 50 more bricks. Ballin' like a